Chapter 470. Although I still don't know the true identity of the enemies, I have a good understanding of them. Maeve said to Wuming. Maeve was the queen of Connaught, and she had more than just charm. Among them, the soldiers of the Yellow Grail are the most special. Maeve pointed to the area below the Great Lakes. Their soldiers are Dragon Fang soldiers. From the quality of their battle, there is no doubt that they are the Dragon Fang soldiers that can only be created by the magicians of the gods. However, I don't know if these Dragon Fang soldiers were created by the traitor witch. After all, Maeve had not fully understood the situation. Dragon Fang soldiers were skeleton soldiers summoned by the dragon's fangs. The reason why Maeve said, whether they were created by the traitor witch, was because of the magic. Legend has it that the summoning of dragon fangs was a family heirloom magic of the Greek king of Colchis. It was passed down to the princess of Colchis Medea, who learned magic from the goddess Hecate. In the later generations, she was also known as the traitor witch. However, Demetrius was not the only one who knew how to use Dragon Fang soldiers. Wuming had also encountered servants who used Dragon Fang soldiers. During the War of the 14 Nights, Empress Semiramis's noble phantasm stored a large number of Dragon Fang soldiers. The number was beyond imagination. Therefore it could not be defined based on this clue. Anyway, this Yellow Grail was related to Greece, so it was temporarily named the Greek Grail. Then, Maeve pointed her slender finger to the bottom of the American continent on the map. In the Mississippi Plains, the Grail forces there have ordinary soldiers, but if I'm not mistaken, their emblem is a mother wolf nursing a baby. After Maeve finished, Wuming nodded. That means, this is the army of Rome. The founder of Rome, Romulus, was raised by a mother wolf. Legend has it that the emblem of Rome at that time was a mother wolf nursing a baby. That's right, I still know about Rome. After all, Rome was established much earlier than Maeve's era. Even Maeve had a general understanding of the situation on the other side of the coast. However, I don't know which emperor it is. Maeve smiled. She did not care about this, and then she hugged Wuming again. In her opinion, as long as her king was here, all enemies were nothing. Ahem. Let's call this force the Rome force for now. What about this place? Wuming coughed, then pointed to the Rocky Mountains and the eastern mountainous area. This was the third Holy Grail force. What are you talking about? There are no soldiers. Mai Fu loosened her grip on Wuming's arm and continued to explain. Due to the distance, although I don't know which faction it is, I can still sense it through the connection between the Holy Grails. After a slight pause, Maeve continued. In addition to the fact that the other two factions didn't take over the mountain range, this third faction, the Holy Grail faction, took over the mountain range that no one cared about. Maeve's army was merely observing from the top of the Appalachian Mountains. They did not have a deep understanding of the situation. He was lucky to be able to see the dragon tooth soldiers and the Roman emblem. That's because only these two forces are constantly fighting in the northern part of the Mississippi Plains. No matter if it's Lionhead's native forces in the United States, the third additional Holy Grail force in the Green area, or our Celtic forces, none of them have made any moves. In other words, it's now a turf war between the Greeks and Romans. After digesting this information, Wuming said helplessly. This is really a mythical war now. Celtic, Greece, Rome, the United States, and an unknown force. There was no doubt that these were all surprises brought by the Magic King for Wuming, surprises that gave Wuming a headache. But, I'm a cheating player, Magic King. Then, Wuming issued an order. That's it for the time being, Maeve. Our side will stay in the eastern part of the American continent. Yes, my king. Now, Wuming was really like a king, and Maeve, the queen, began to listen to him. Then, I'll go meet the Greek and Roman soldiers first. You stay here and watch over our home. With that, Wuming picked Maeve up and placed her on the seat. He then strode out of the room, leaving Maeve alone in the room. Humph, it doesn't matter if he's not the Mad King. The Holy King's Sai is really handsome, our home. Iya. Just like that, the seductive and wanton queen turned into a shy young girl who was yearning for love. In the corridor, Wuming walked without saying a word. In order to maintain his dignity, Wuming used the corner of his eyes to look at the soldiers with his face guarding the corridor and felt a sense of powerlessness. Why did I believe her in the first place? Wuming whispered in a voice that only he could hear. What Wuming was talking about was naturally the time when he gave Maeve his blood essence to create the cyborgs. But even so, Wu Ming also led this group of cyborgs into battle. I didn't feel ashamed at the time. Was I in a state similar to Chunibyu at the time? Shaking his head in his heart, Wu Ming gave up thinking about nonsense. When he walked to the gate of the White House, Wu Ming waved his arm, and a blood-red cloak appeared behind the pure white holy armor. The blood-red cloak matched with the holy armor, but it did not become dirty. Instead, it highlighted Wu Ming's holiness even more. Farewell, Holy King! Suddenly, all the Celtic soldiers with Wu Ming's face knelt down and roared at Wu Ming. Wu Ming was startled. What the hell is with this roar? It's as if they want to beat up Wu Ming. I can only say that they are indeed Seltzer, however. For the sake of his dignity, Wu Ming did not show any surprise. Aha! Wu Ming responded indifferently. Then, with a wave of his hand, a pure white holy spear appeared in his hand. Wu Ming tossed the holy spear in his hand and it transformed into a pure white deer beast smaller than Fun Baba. But don't be mistaken, Wu Ming's Fun Baba was left behind in Uruk. This was only because Wu Ming transformed the holy spear in his current state. In short, it was still the holy spear, Yggdrasil, but in a different shape. Woo! The deer beast lightly responded, and Wu Ming immediately jumped onto the deer beast's back. Wu Ming, who was wearing armor, looked extremely suitable riding on the deer beast that was much smaller than Fun Baba. After all, this was the mount that Wu Ming transformed into himself, so it was definitely suitable. Woo! The deer beast responded softly again and carried Wu Ming into the distance. That was the location of the Appalachian Mountains. Wu Ming planned to cross the Appalachian Mountains directly to his destination, the northern Mississippi plains where constant battles occurred. Chapter 471. At the top of the Appalachian Mountains, Wu Ming rode his deer beast to the top of the mountain. Then, Wu Ming jumped off the deer beast and looked into the distance. Ka! Along with a cracking sound, the helmet on Silent Cry's head that looked like it had grown dragon horns automatically separated like Mordred's helmet, attaching itself to his shoulders and back. Wu Ming, who finally revealed his head, couldn't help but take a deep breath. Phew, the air in the mountains is indeed very cool. Wu Ming looked around with his eyes that had turned golden because of the Holy King. It's called the Great Mythological War, and it's not wrong at all. Wu Ming could clearly feel that the mana density of this singularity was continuously increasing. Although it was probably because of the Magic King, but is the excessive use of the Holy Grail a side effect on the singularity? Wu Ming pondered. After all, how do you think the Dragon Fang soldiers, Roman soldiers, and Wu Ming Celtic soldiers were mass-produced? Even Maeve wouldn't be able to summon enough soldiers to occupy half of America in a short period of time without using the Holy Grail. It was probably the same for the Dragon Fang and Roman soldiers. I wonder how many lone servants there are on this continent. Wu Ming said as he looked down at the battlefield that seemed to have already begun. Wu Ming learned from Roman that the Holy Grail of every singularity would summon a lot of lone servants. Therefore, Wu Ming was thinking about the lone servants. If we can rope him in, he will be of great help to Tachika. However, he had to have the opportunity to meet a good lone follower. Then, Wu Ming closed his helmet and sat on the white deer beast again. Oh! Wu Ming rode the deer and galloped toward the foot of the mountain. His scarlet cape fluttered in the wind, making rustling noises. At the foot of the mountain, not far from the northern battlefield of the Mississippi Plains. In the north was a group of ferocious-looking skeleton soldiers that didn't look human, the Dragon Tooth soldiers. Some of the Dragon Teeth soldiers were holding large bone blades, some were holding long bone spears, and some were holding curved bone bows. They were arranged in an extremely orderly manner. In the south was a group of Roman soldiers wearing old but tough leather armor. The Roman soldiers were basically armed with spears, shields, and short swords at their waists. Both armies were heavily guarded, and there were no commanders in sight. It was as if they were about to engage in a daily battle. Both armies moved and began to attack each other. The vanguard of both sides made contact. There was no flashy exchange of blows. It was just a mutual attack of you with a saber and I with a spear, you with a sword and I with a shield. It had to be said that such a battle was merely a matter of who had more troops. However, for both sides who possessed the Holy Grail, this was indeed a terrible idea. Therefore, after such a long battle, it was time for them to change their strategy. For example, taking a picture of a general or something. Roar! All of a sudden, an inhuman roar sounded from behind the Dragon Fang soldiers. Then, a huge black figure jumped into the camp of the Roman soldiers. Boom! When the black figure landed in the camp of the Roman soldiers, it directly caused a violent impact to the Roman soldiers. Roar! The black figure roared again. It was holding a strange stone axe. It was a 2.5-meter-tall figure. Its whole body was naked, and only the lower half of its body was wearing a tattered combat uniform. Its naked body had a healthy dark complexion. Its muscles were bound, and its wrists and ankles were shackled. His eyes were filled with madness. Without a doubt, this was a berserker. If Wu Ming was here, he would definitely be surprised. This was the berserker that they met in Winterwood City. His real name was Hercules. Hercules was constantly waving his axe and sword as he began to massacre the Roman soldiers. It had to be said that a berserker was indeed a berserker. His destructive power was not to be underestimated. In just a few minutes, more than half of the Roman soldiers were killed or injured. However, since the Dragon Fang soldiers had already sent a general, the Roman soldiers had no choice but to send a general as well. Immediately afterward, a red-eyed man wearing ancient golden Roman armor, a battle skirt, and a tattered red cloak behind him rushed over with a roar. He seemed to be a berserker as well. Ow! Ow! Roar! The two berserkers roared at each other and began to fight. The Greek berserker swung his huge axe and sword and attacked the Roman berserker. On the other hand, the Roman berserker was not afraid of pain. He carried his axe and sword and attacked the Greek berserker. The two berserkers with similar strength and durability were fighting each other just like that. After a few moves, the Roman berserker was clearly at a disadvantage and was beginning to be suppressed by the Greek berserker. There was no doubt that if there were no reinforcements or something special happened, Rome's berserker would definitely die. Ow! Ow! The Roman berserker roared unwillingly. Suddenly, a ray of moonlight appeared in the sky and shone around the Roman berserker. That was the Roman berserker's noble phantasm. It could cause mental damage to the enemies in the surrounding area. Roar! It could only be said that Hercules was indeed worthy of his name. Even if he had gone berserk, it could be said that because he had gone berserk, the enemy's noble phantasm had no effect on him. However, the surrounding Roman soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers could not. The Roman soldiers began to go berserk. Kada kada kada. The Dragon Fang soldiers also went berserk. Then, the Roman soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers who were affected by the Roman berserker's noble phantasm began to attack Hercules crazily. Roar! Ants could even kill an elephant. However, to Hercules, these soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers were not ants. At most, they could only affect Hercules. Hercules crazily crushed these soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers and began to attack indiscriminately. As long as they were close to him, they would be smashed into pieces by Hercules's axe. However, the Roman berserker was also among them, constantly attacking Hercules. The Roman berserker, who could match Hercules' strength, could cause damage to Hercules with every attack. This was what they meant by ants could kill an elephant. Of course, that referred to Hercules being attacked by the Roman berserker. At that moment, there was a sudden magical fluctuation not far away from the two servants, and the two berserkers could not help but look over there. With a flash of light, two figures appeared in the same place. Reiki transfer normal, to Chica Matthew. You have come to the United States in 1783. Roman's voice came from Godotzi's wrist. It was Matthew who was wearing Chaldea's master clothes and Galahad's Reiki suit. Doctor, are you sure this is the United States in 1783? Godotzi and Matthew looked at the battlefield in horror. Was there such a fierce battle in the United States at that time? Coincidentally, Hercules and Rome's berserker were looking at the two unknown enemies who had entered the battlefield. Godotzi and Matthew could not help but swallow their saliva. It feels like we're finished. Chapter 472. Roar! Ah! Hercules and Rome's berserker roared in unison, as if they were extremely angry at their former enemy who had suddenly entered the battlefield. It's over. That's Hercules and Caligula. Godotzi shouted in a panic. They were the enemies that Godotzi and Matthew encountered at the second and third singularities. As if they also had an impression of Godotzi and Matthew, Hercules and Caligula roared and ran towards the two. "Senior, please step back." Matthew raised his shield and stood in front of Godotzi. Hercules raised his axe and sword and smashed it down at Matthew. Clang! The sword and axe collided with the holy shield, producing an ear-piercing sound. Ha! After blocking Hercules' attack, Matthew shouted and pushed Hercules away. After experiencing 4 singularities, Matthew had indeed become a lot stronger. Hercules was a humanoid Gundam whose strength had reached A+. Even though it was not easy for Matthew to block his full-powered attack, he was still able to do so. "Senior, it's too dangerous here. Prepare to break out of the battlefield," Matthew said to Godotzi without looking back. Godotzi was not an idiot. The Dragon Fang soldiers and Roman soldiers had begun to surround them. No matter what, they had to leave the battlefield first. When a scholar meets a soldier, it is difficult to reason with him. This was probably the case. No matter which side it was, there was no way to communicate with them at the moment, so it was best to leave now. Ah! "Senior!" Matthew shouted and stood in front of Caligula, who wanted to attack Godotzi. "Doctor, is Miss Pamilia not ready yet?" Godotzi quickly said to her wrist while Matthew blocked Caligula. Pamilia was sleeping because of the habits of vampires, so she did not follow Matthew and others. "It's too late, Tachika. Although it's a bit irresponsible to say this now, we can only rely on you and Matthew now." Roman's helpless voice came from the watch. "Ah, really, if only Assassin was here," Godotzi complained. As if the heavens were playing a joke, a rather huge source of magic was quickly approaching them. It was the power of light, the extreme light that could illuminate all darkness. "Tachika! Matthew! There's a huge source of magic approaching you. It's impossible to determine whether it's an enemy or not. Be careful," Roman said excitedly. "Doctor, we've already seen it here," Godotzi complained to Roman. In the east of the battlefield, like the rising sun, a fierce light shone and quickly impacted the camps of both sides. Roar dash! Oh! Hercules, who was about to attack Godotzi again, and Caligula, who was blocked by Matthew, both turned their heads and looked at the light. It seems that the two berserkers judged that this light was more to be targeted than the enemy. Hercules and Caligula gave up attacking Godotzi and Matthew, and headed towards the source of the light in the east. "Anyway, we're saved," Godotzi sighed. However, even without the two threats of Hercules and Caligula, the surrounding Dragon Fang soldiers and Roman soldiers were not to be trifled with. Surprisingly, the quality of these two soldiers was quite high. Matthew used his shield to knock away one enemy after another, and quickly said to Godotzi, "Senior, let's take advantage of this opportunity to break through." Because of Hercules' hammer and Caligula's noble phantasm, the Roman soldiers and dragon teeth soldiers around Godotzi and Mashu were not gathered together. Therefore, they were confident to break through the encirclement. "Quick! Matthew, let's leave quickly." Then, Matthew covered Godotzi and the two broke through to the west. Why break through to the west? What a joke! The light in the east was not to be trifled with. If they didn't hurry to the west, they would be waiting for death. Because of this, Godotzi and Wuming were getting farther and farther away, in the east, where the light was. Silent Wonder held the holy white spear in his hand, and destroyed the Roman soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers that were rushing forward as if he was unparalleled. With this level of soldiers, the enemy must have used the Holy Grail, Wuming said while mowing the grass. Although Wuming was mowing the grass, the strength of these Roman soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers was already very high. Wuming had also encountered Dragon Fang soldiers, but compared to these Dragon Fang soldiers, those Dragon Fang soldiers were simply broken bones. Naturally, the Roman soldiers who were comparable to the Dragon Fangs were also extremely strong. Simply put, the original green monsters with good quality had become orange monsters with epic quality. In any case, they are just mass-produced soldiers. Not to mention the Dragon Fang soldiers, the Roman soldiers were exactly the same. And there was no fear in them. There was no doubt that they were summoned using the Holy Grail. It was the same as Wuming's Celtic soldiers. It's about time. Using normal attacks to clear the monsters was too slow, so Wuming prepared to use a skill. Silent Wonder swept away all the enemies around him. Then, he pointed the Holy Lance Yggdrasil downwards and stabbed it into the ground. Feel the radiance of the Holy King, Wu Ming said as he injected magic into the holy spear. Boom! In an instant, the magic of light was released and overturned the soldiers and the ground, causing a violent explosion. The scorching light purified the enemies and the ground. Wu Ming stood in a large crater that looked like it was hit by a meteorite and pulled out the holy spear that was still stuck in the ground. Holy King's Radiance. Ace the descent of the Holy King. The radiance of mercy accompanied the Holy King. The effect could be said to be similar to the Ghost Seed Demon's skill. It was a combination of natural demon, strange strength, charm, magic release, and so on. Wu Ming used the effect of the light magic release. It had to be said that the effect was outstanding. Wu Ming's attack just now almost changed the terrain of the northeastern Mississippi plains, and the attacking Roman soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers were basically wiped out. Roar! Oh! Suddenly, two different roars were heard, and two figures appeared at the edge of the crater. Is that Hercules and the unknown berserker? Wu Ming knew Hercules because he had met him before. However, Wu Ming really did not know Berserker, who was like an emperor. However, this did not hinder Wu Ming. Both of them did not come with good intentions. Mythical Yggdrasil. Chapter 473. Mythical Yggdrasil. Wu Ming didn't say anything and directly released the true name of the Holy Spear. The originally solid Holy Spear in his hand seemed to have turned into light, shining with infinite brilliance. Even Hercules and Caligula couldn't help but raise their arms to block the dazzling brilliance. Pure brilliance, Holy World Tree, help me purify the evil. Wu Ming shouted loudly and threw the Aurora Pillar in his hand like a javelin at Caligula. After all, Wu Ming didn't know Caligula well and didn't know if he was a strong threat. But Wu Ming knew that Hercules could resurrect 11 times, and he would be immune to all attacks he had received. Therefore, Wu Ming chose to get rid of Caligula, the unknown berserker, first. Ah! The intense pain made Caligula roar. The spear of light hit Caligula's body at a speed that Caligula couldn't react to. It passed through his body and left a glowing hole in his body. Bang! Then, Caligula exploded and overturned Hercules, who didn't have time to leave Caligula's side. This was the power of Wu Ming. No, it should be the light of the Holy King. At this point, the Roman berserker, Caligula, was eliminated. Roar! Hercules got up and roared at Wu Ming. Next, it's your turn. Wu Ming waved his hand and the holy spear that had turned into light returned to Wu Ming's hand and turned into a solid object. It had to be said that Hercules' 12 trials, God Hand, was really powerful. It was even more cheating than Wu Ming, who cheated. It was immune to B-level damage and could resurrect 11 times. It had a strong resistance to attacks that killed at once. If the master's aptitude was high and had enough magic, the number of resurrections that were lost could be recovered. Even if Wu Ming was extremely powerful now, he couldn't be sure that he could kill Hercules and make him leave. But, I don't need to kill you. I just need to defeat you, Wu Ming said as he rushed toward Hercules with his spear. Roar! Hercules saw the man in white armor running toward him and roared crazily. After all, Hercules was a demigod hero and could be said to be the most famous hero in Greece. Even if he was a berserker and had lost his mind, he had his own pride. How could Hercules be afraid of his opponent, who was also a berserker, who had unleashed his noble phantasm right from the start? He just looked a little fairer than him, had more mana, and was on par with him in terms of ability value. He just looked a little prettier than him. Roar! I, Hercules, am not afraid. Along with the roar, Hercules jumped up and raised his axe to attack Wu Ming. Even if Hercules had lost most of his mind, his body's instinct was still there. His instinct allowed Hercules to hit Wu Ming directly. Dong! There was a small hole in the pit that was originally a big one. The small hole was filled with smoke and dust. Whoosh! A white spear came out of the smoke and swept across. Wu Ming swept the smoke and dust away. There was not a single speck of dust on his white armor. When Hercules was about to hit him with his sword, Wu Ming used his holy spear to block it. In addition to his relic, Arthur's gift armor, even without the protection of his holy spear, Wu Ming did not suffer any damage when Hercules hit him. To put it simply, Wu Ming's relic was tougher than Hercules' body from the 12 trials. Roar! Perhaps Hercules saw that his attack was ineffective. He roared again and rushed toward Wu Ming. When Wu Ming saw Hercules rushing toward him, he reached behind him and grabbed his cloak. He threw the cloak at Hercules. Hercules cut the cloak in half with his sword and axe. The cloak turned into magic particles and drifted away with the wind. Following that, the tip of the spear appeared in front of Hercules. The tip of the spear was aimed at Hercules' head. However, how could it hit Hercules, who had mind's eye? Hercules turned his head and easily dodged the attack. Roar! Following that, Hercules roared and swept his sword and axe at Wu Ming, who was close to him. After Wu Ming's attack failed, he held the end of the spear and used the holy spear as a pole. He inserted it into the ground behind Hercules. When Hercules' sword and axe swept over, he jumped and came behind Hercules. The surrounding magic instantly gathered and light appeared behind Hercules. Dong! His foot, which contained the magic of light, kicked Hercules from behind. Hercules was kicked to the bottom of the pit by silent sound. After all, both of them were now fighting on the slope of the giant pit. Wu Ming's kick, coupled with the influence of gravity, caused Hercules to roll toward the center of the giant pit. Wu Ming took back his leg that was still moving because of the kick. He stood firm and pulled out the holy spear from the ground. Wu Ming's kick just now had reached the A level, and it was slightly higher. Even Hercules couldn't withstand this attack. However, although he was injured, it certainly wouldn't have a big impact on the battle. Hercules inserted his sword and axe into the ground on the way to the bottom of the pit. He stopped abruptly and then turned over. Roar! Hercules was even more enraged by Wu Ming's humiliation of the Greek hero. At this moment, Wu Ming heard a voice. Phoebus' catastrophe, complaint of arrows. Xiao 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 xiao. In an instant, countless dark green arrows wrapped in strong magic power came down from the sky, and the arrow formation fell straight towards Silent Wonder. Boom boom boom. Wu Ming was buried by the arrow formation. The smoke produced by the arrow formation filled the big pit. Then, a spaceship appeared in the air. As the name suggested, it was a spaceship. It was a gorgeous sailboat that flew into the sky. A green figure stood on the bow, still in the posture of drawing a bow. After seeing her noble phantasm hit Wu Ming, Atlanta spoke. "Come back, Hercules," Atlanta said to Hercules in a steady tone that was neither commanding nor pleading. Roar! Although Hercules did not listen to the words of the Greek Holy Grail holder when he was summoned, Hercules would still listen to Atlanta a little. Immediately, Hercules jumped onto the spaceship. Then, Atlanta looked at the place where the smoke was gradually dissipating. Although Atlanta's noble phantasm was a B level, for Wu Ming, who could even block Hercules' attack, each arrow alone could not threaten him at all. Even if Atlanta deliberately concentrated the arrows, it was estimated that it would not cause any harm to Wu Ming. This was indeed the case. When the smoke was completely dispersed, Wu Ming's spotless figure was still standing in the big pit that was almost destroyed. "Such a familiar noble phantasm, I guessed it must be you," Wu Ming said lightly. Chapter 474. Although Wu Ming's voice was not loud, Atlanta, who had a particularly good hearing, still heard it. "I don't know you, Celtic hero." Atlanta held the heavenly bow blessed by Artemis and aimed at Wu Ming again. Although Atlanta kept saying that she didn't know Wu Ming remembered Atlanta, and there was a reason why Atlanta didn't know Wu Ming. Servants were the avatars of heroic spirits, and each avatar was different. To put it simply, the main body was divided into many avatars, and what you know is just one of the avatars. Therefore, if you thought that you had met a servant in the Holy Grail War, you would be wrong to think that he or she knew you and befriended you when you saw him or her in other places. In the next second, he or she is likely to kill you because he or she is not the first avatar that you know. He or she may be the second avatar, the third avatar, or even the infinite avatar. Therefore, the current Atlanta was probably not the Atlanta of the 14 Horsemen, but there was another possibility. Wu Ming was now fully armed, and his face was covered. Atlanta may have said that she didn't know him because she couldn't see Wu Ming's face. In any case, even if Atlanta knew Wu Ming, the two of them among the 14 Horsemen were opponents. In addition, Wu Ming hadn't figured out the situation of the spaceship yet. Wu Ming didn't think that Atlanta could come to his side. "Unfortunately, I know you." Wu Ming's slightly helpless voice came from under the armor. Wu Ming began to be vigilant. His fingers slid, and the defensive Loon rune appeared and attached to Wu Ming's armor. Atlanta's strength was quite low, but the heavenly bow blessed by moon god Artemis, when the arrow was fully drawn, the damage had reached A class, which meant that it could hurt Hercules. However, Wu Ming's armor could defend against A-class physical attacks. It stood to reason that Atlanta couldn't hurt Wu Ming. But in case there were other servants on the ship who were ready to attack Wu Ming, then the probability of Wu Ming capsizing would be high. At that moment, a disgusting voice came from the ship, as if that person was a scum. "What are you doing? Atlanta, why don't you shoot the arrow?" Although he couldn't see the person, Wu Ming could be sure that the owner of the voice was not a good person. From Atlanta's Frowns' face. "With all due respect, Ison, our original plan was to retreat after retrieving Hercules." Atlanta did not put down the heavenly bow, nor did she shoot an arrow at Silent Cry. Instead, she said without looking back. Hearing this name Atlanta as people who knew a little about Greek mythology should know the story of the Argo hero ship. It was an adventure ship that gathered many Greek heroes, including Hercules and Atlanta, to search for the Golden Fleece. However, many people might not know but it was not wrong. In Greek mythology, was not very famous. It was because he was the captain and initiator of the Argo hero ship that has had a little fame. He was arrogant and domineering, proud, and naive, easy to be deceived. He successfully regained the throne by relying on the power of Demetrius, whom he had swindled. After marriage, he abandoned Demetrius. As a result, Demetrius took revenge on him. In the end, because of the curse of the goddess of beauty Aphrodite, he was killed by the heavy wood that fell from the Argo hero ship. In this way, this ship must be the Argo hero ship. Hercules, Atlanta, and is on the ship with the best proof. "Tisk, you woman!" Ison's angry voice rang out. Because the ship stopped above Wu Ming's head, Wu Ming could not see or anyone else on the ship. He could only see Atlanta standing on the side of the ship. Of course, even so, Wu Ming could not appreciate the scenery under Atlanta's skirt. After all, the angle was not quite right. Cough cough. Immediately afterward, Atlanta jumped back to the ship, and the Argo hero ship immediately moved and began to drive toward the location of the Great Lakes in the north. "Want to go? Ask for my gun first," Wu Ming said as he swung his gun and was ready to release his noble phantasm again. The bottom of the Argo hero ship and Wu Ming's light gun. Which one was more powerful? Probably everyone knew that, and the servants on the Argo hero ship naturally understood this truth. As a result, countless magic circles appeared around the Argo hero ship in a composite form, and then, the magic circles began to gather energy. Judging by the concentration of magic, Wu Ming judged that the power of these magic circles was not small. Although it was not as powerful as a noble phantasm, it was enough to cause damage to Wu Ming. It seemed that the magician on the Argo hero ship had already begun to chant, otherwise, there would not be so many powerful magic circles appearing in an instant. And the target of these magic circles was naturally Wu Ming. In the blink of an eye, the mana in the magic array finished gathering and fired at Silent Wonder. Like a heavy downpour, countless mana pillars that could melt steel poured down from the sky. Boom! Damn, the explosion caused by the mana pillar deepened the crater even further. Then, a light gun flew out of the center of the explosion. Mythical Yggdrasil. Boom! The light gun directly hit the Argo hero ship, penetrating through the bottom of the ship and coming out from the deck, blasting a big hole in the bottom of the ship. The Argo hero ship started to smoke as if it had been shot. Then, Ison's panic screams came from the Argo hero ship. "Ah! My ship! Quick, quick! Quick, quick, quick!" Demetrius, quickly use spatial magic. Then, the entire ship disappeared. Without a doubt, the Argo hero ship had been transported away by Demetrius, who Ison was talking about. Demetrius. That means these magic circles were all created by her, and those Dragonfang soldiers were probably created by her too. Wu Ming's voice came from the center of the explosion. Gradually, the explosion dissipated, and Wu Ming's figure was revealed in the pit that had become even deeper. His armor was still spotless. Wu Ming waved his hand, and the holy spear returned to his hand. That spatial magic was probably set up on the Argo hero ship in advance as a precaution. After all, using spatial magic to transport such a large ship was absolutely impossible. Then, Wu Ming sensed the reaction of the servants around him and said lightly, "Using the defensive loon magic in advance is really the right choice." After all, after Atlanta used her noble phantasm, Wu Ming cast a defensive loon rune on himself because he was afraid that there would be more powerful attacks. Otherwise, Wu Ming would be injured by Demetrius's magic, even with the noble phantasm Arthur's gift. If he was injured, it would be a bit difficult to deal with the new servants. Immediately, Wu Ming looked at the edge of the giant pit, and 4 servants appeared. Chapter 475. "What a spectacular sea!" a fat man dressed in red and yellow said leisurely, "just like an emperor." "Caesar-sama, I just received a message from the god ancestor. Caligula has left the battlefield." A woman wearing an ancient blue dress next to the fat man said, I know, Cleopatra, then the murderer must be this king," Caesar said, looking at Wu Ming. The holy white armor, the holy spear, whether it was Caesar or Cleopatra, they didn't think that the enemy was easy to deal with. The scene of Wu Ming piercing Argo's noble phantasm was still in their minds. However, these two are not easy to deal with. As he spoke, Caesar glanced at the red-haired young arrogant king and the black-haired frivolous swordsman with his small eyes that appeared to be too fat. "Cedo. The rest of Cedo. Cedo's aura is here. Damn it. Those Greek hyenas, I will never let you go." The young king roared angrily. "Well, he doesn't look easy to deal with now." Caesar smiled and waved his hand. "Oh, Celinda, I didn't expect you to descend in this way. I thought Maeve would use the Holy Grail to distort you into the Mad King." The frivolous black-haired man greeted Wu Ming, then jumped into the huge pit with his huge spiral sword. "Fergus, were you also summoned by Maeve?" Wu Ming calmly looked at his old friend, who was killed by Gil in Winterwood City. Not to mention that he still couldn't remember what happened in Fuyuki City. Moreover, the Celtic warriors weren't people that could be held on to by trivial matters. Let's not talk about this for now. The two over there are servants from Rome, and the one on the other side is the hero of India, Rama. Let's talk about the details later," Fergus said and retreated behind Wu Ming. Looking at the fresh wound on Fergus' chest, there was no doubt that Fergus was seriously injured. Don't look at how frivolous Fergus' words were. He was already at his limit. The wound extended from his left shoulder to his right abdomen. Although the bleeding had temporarily stopped, Fergus probably wouldn't be able to fight anymore. "Then go back to Washington. You'll just be a burden if you stay here," Wu Ming said without looking back. "Then I'll leave it to you." Fergus smiled and left while whistling. Wu Ming first looked at Caesar and Cleopatra before looking at the red-haired Rama. The name Rama reminded Wu Ming of the last king of the god slayers, who was also Rama. The two of them were the Rama of their respective worlds, but they would not have any connection. "You're a Celtic too, right? In that case, you are also responsible for what happened to Cedo. Bear it properly for me." Rama shouted furiously as he raised the undying blade in his hand. "Brahmastra, indestructible Rakshasa." After activating his noble phantasm, Rama threw the undying blade at Wu Ming. Among them, the lightning and flame on the undying blade made Wu Ming nervous. According to the type, Rama's indestructible Rakshasa, was a magic noble phantasm. But that didn't mean that magic noble phantasm couldn't attack non-magic. And in terms of level, Rama's indestructible Rakshasa, 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 was an A+ noble phantasm. This made Wu Ming curse in his heart. What the F***ck? Even if Wu Ming had the noble phantasm Arthur's gift and the Loon defense rune, Wu Ming wouldn't dare to take that attack head-on. What if I hang up? Wu Ming didn't have any powerful defensive noble phantasm or defensive ability, so Wu Ming used the skill Holy King's Glory. Wu Ming crazily squeezed the magical power in his body. In an instant, endless light shone from Wu Ming's body. Even Caesar and Crowbart, who were servants, couldn't bear the light and directly raised their arms. And Rama was the same. Of course, Wu Ming didn't intend to use this skill to resist, but to use magical power to release it. The legend of the Holy King. Holy King. Rama raised the Holy Lance, and with the magical power provided by Wu Ming that was equivalent to 3 noble phantasms, the Holy Lance turned into a huge light cannon. Then, Wu Ming threw it heavily. Boom! Rumble! When the indestructible blade came into contact with the light cannon, there was silence at first. Then there was an explosion. The aftermath of the explosion was comparable to that of a nuclear bomb. Caesar, Cleopatra, and Rama were blown away. Even Fergus, who had just walked a short distance away, was affected. However, even though Fergus had walked a long distance away from the big pit, he was still affected by the explosion. It was enough to see the power of Wu Ming's noble phantasm. Fergus inserted the neon sword deep into the ground, and held the hilt with difficulty to prevent it from being blown away. After about 10 seconds, the storm stopped. Well, Cylinder is too reckless. Even if he has a lot of magical power, he can't do whatever he wants. Although he complained, Fergus had a smile on his face. After all, the Celtics were considered a fighting race. Fergus looked at the area behind him, as if it was swallowed by the explosion. The whole big pit could no longer be seen because it was all white. Well, I'm injured. I'll let him do it himself. After that, Fergus carried his spiral sword and walked toward Washington. After a long time, the white substance dissipated, and a barren plain was revealed under the sky. Why was it a plain? Because the explosion directly dug out a piece of the area. In short, it was actually a flat basin. That was the trump card of a servant, the power of a noble phantasm, which was powerful enough to change the terrain. Of course, to be able to turn the surrounding hundreds of hectares of plain into a basin was not something that could be done casually by a servant. At least, Fergus could not do it. At most, he could only scorch the land in front of him that was tens of thousands of meters long and thousands of meters wide. At that moment, a white hand suddenly stretched out from the ground of the basin. Taking a closer look, it was not a white hand. It was obviously a white gauntlet with a white gauntlet. Wu Ming climbed out of the ground. The white armor was slightly dim at the moment. Wu Ming supported his body with the holy lance and looked around. This holy king's body is a bit scary. I just used 3 times more mana to supply the noble phantasm, plus a super strong mana release, and the explosion was so amazing. Well, ordinary servants would be drained of their mana in an instant if they did that. Only Wu Ming, who had a special ability, dared to do that. Mana amplification. EX, the perfect attribute of the root dragon. No matter what class, the root dragon's mana was almost unlimited, and it was not affected by the class. Because of his almost limitless magic, coupled with his cheat code and Maeve's use of the Holy Grail, Silent Cry has really become able to do whatever he wants. Rama, Caesar, and the others, I'm afraid they would have been blown away. Because Wu Ming was in the center of the big pit, Wu Ming was buried underground. Rama and the others, who were at the edge of the big pit, were unlikely to be buried underground. It was very likely that they would have been blown away. Forget it, let's leave it at that for the time being. The information collection is almost done. After that, Wu Ming also began to move toward Washington. Good heavens, so the reason for this nuclear flattening was to gather intelligence. Chapter 476. Logically speaking, there should be a lot of local residents around the basin that was turned from a plain to a nuclear flattened. However, the surrounding area was subconsciously identified as a battlefield by Greece and Rome. Therefore, the local residents in this area were evacuated by Greece and Rome. Both Greece and Rome set up capital cities in their respective territories and gathered the people as if they were establishing a country. The people, on the other hand, chose a side to join in order to protect themselves. It's really beyond my expectations. I thought they wouldn't care about the life and death of the local residents. Wu Ming sat in the president's seat and casually flipped through the information collected by Maeve after Wu Ming left. At this moment, Wu Ming's originally battered armor was restored to its holy state. There was no doubt that Maeve directly used a command spell to restore Wu Ming to his full state. This is not surprising. After all, both sides have similar leader. Maeve stood behind Wu Ming and said with a smile while hugging Wu Ming's neck. Rome's words were still understandable. After all, it was Caligula and Caesar. It was normal for them to build a city. On the other hand, Greece was more than happy to play the king's game. After all, Greece had Jason. That guy used women for revenge. If you used them, then so be it. After becoming a king, marry her and live an honest life. But in the end, you abandoned her. Although both sides had leaders, neither Wu Ming nor Maeve would agree with such a man. There are also residents in our territory, right? Wu Ming continued to look at the information and said to Maeve without looking back. That's right, because Sai became the Holy King, the original plan to kill everything was cancelled. Maeve said calmly. She didn't find it strange that she said to kill everything. After Maeve occupied Washington, or rather after occupying half of the United States, before she could do anything to the local residents, the other Holy Grail forces came and divided the United States, which was originally divided into 2 parts, into 5 parts. Maeve then retreated to Washington. After that, Maeve decided to establish her capital in Washington. She was no longer in the mood to kill. A few days later, Maeve summoned Wu Ming. After that, because of the Holy King's reputation, Mai Fu also changed her policies. She started to treat it like a country and no longer had any bad intentions. Only the Holy Grail faction that occupied the Rocky Mountains had no intention of building a city there. The Rocky Mountains were already lacking in population. As a result, a small portion of the population migrated to Greece and Rome. Of course, the westernmost force of the United States, the Lion Head, represented the United States from the very beginning. If it were not for the Rocky Mountains, the people of the American continent would have run over to the Lion Head. Now, regardless of whether they were forced or not, the natives were living in the Celtic territory. After all, as long as little Sai wants to do something, I will accompany you. If you become the wise mad king, I will become your bloody queen. I will fight alongside you. If you become the holy king, I will become your holy queen. I will rule the kingdom with you. That is my wish. I will accompany you until the day I die. Maeve's usual charm was gone. At this moment, she was really like an ordinary girl accompanying her sweetheart. She hugged Wu Ming gently. When he was summoned by the Holy Grail, Wu Ming heard Maeve's wish. Not a king who can kill with me, but a king who can make me accompany you. Wu Ming fell silent. What man would reject a girl who was willing to do anything for him? Indeed, Wu Ming's initial interest in Maeve was not because he coveted Maeve's beauty. It was because he was a greenhorn and could not help but be interested in the things around him. Wu Ming had just changed from an ordinary person to the identity of the root dragon. He had also learned from Skaha. When he went out to Connaught, it was a pity that he did not see Maeve, who had played all the Celtic heroes in the palm of her hand. After all, he was young and frivolous. The reason why Maeve fell in love with Wu Ming was not only because of his heroic act of saving the damsel in distress, but also because Wu Ming ignored Maeve's charm. Maeve's beautiful body made her every move full of charm, and Wu Ming resisted Maeve's charm because of his powerful mental strength as the root dragon. Because of these two things, Maeve became interested in Wu Ming. At first, her love was indeed to play Wu Ming in the palm of her hand, but the real love was to accompany Wu Ming in the future. Wu Ming stayed by Mai Fu's side and learned about Mai Fu's past. Even if her body was full of charm, which girl was not innocent after birth? Maeve also had an unforgettable past to become like this. Whether it was pity for Maeve or indignation for Maeve's experience, Wu Ming stayed by Maeve's side and treated her as a younger sister who lacked love. Yes, Wu Ming only treated Maeve as a younger sister who needed to be doted on. The world always thought that Maeve played men in the palm of her hand, but Maeve had never received true love. Whether it was the love between family members, friends, or romantic love, Maeve had never had any of them. It had to be said that Maeve's true love for Wu Ming could be felt by Wu Ming. He was not a straight man, so why didn't Wu Ming accept it? The name of the root dragon was not an ordinary name. Ever since Wu Ming accepted his fate and left his original world to come to this moon, he knew that he would definitely not be ordinary in the future. And Square was often accompanied by danger. Before he obtained enough power to protect the people he wanted to protect, Wu Ming did not consider himself to be a burden. That's right, in the beginning, because Wu Ming did not activate the power of his bloodline, it was a little difficult for him to protect himself. Therefore, a lover was indeed a burden to Wu Ming. Wu Ming was able to leave the square world that he had lived in for more than 10 years without hesitation because he considered his own extraordinariness, because extraordinariness would also bring trouble. And now, facing such a Maeve, Wu Ming felt that he could already consider these things. Hey, Maeve, after I'm done with my business, I'll take your original body to my house. How about that? Wu Ming said in a flat tone. While speaking, Wu Ming put down the information in his hand and leaned back, closer to Maeve. It's time to make some promises. After hearing Wu Ming's words, Maeve's body suddenly trembled. Although Wu Ming was wearing armor, Wu Ming could still feel the change in Maeve. Well, I'll wait for that day. No matter how long it takes, I'll wait for you on the seat of heroes, waiting for you to pick me up. Maeve hugged Wu Ming's arm tightly and said with a happy face. The sun shone in from the window, shining on the pure white couple and blessing them. Chapter 477. Although it was heartwarming, Wu Ming did not want to reveal his innocence here. Then, the two of them began to discuss Rama, who hated the Celts, and Fergus, who was injured. So, you think Cedo is useful, so you asked Fergus to go to Alcatraz Island to transport Cedo, who has been captured a long time ago. In the end, Rama and the Argo who were following Rama were attracted? Wu Ming said calmly. As everyone knew, the American continent was huge, so was the United States. Therefore, the territories were not as strictly divided as Wu Ming had seen from the map. For example, the mountainous plains between the Rocky Mountains and the Great Lakes were unoccupied. The Celts were in the easternmost area, while the Greeks and Romans were in the western plains not far from the Appalachian Mountains. The Holy Grail forces in the Rocky Mountains did not make any moves at all. As for the Lionhead forces, they were temporarily resting in the westernmost area as they could not defeat the other forces. The Missouri River flowed through that area and the terrain was not too high. The Green Holy Grail forces were mainly in the southern part of the Rocky Mountains. Therefore, that area was the largest unoccupied land. Many of the native residents had formed a rebel army. It was said that they were led by a single follower. That was why they could be active in this continent. If the territories were as strictly divided as Wu Ming had seen on the map, how could there be a rebel army? They would have been suppressed by these forces long ago. All in all, the westernmost Alcatraz Island belonged to the easternmost Celts. There was nothing wrong with that. Ahem. Let's not talk about that for now. According to Maeve, she was preparing to withdraw Beowulf, who was stationed in Alcatraz Island. Therefore, she sent Fergus to meet him. In the end, because Rama had a special skill that allowed him to sense Cedo, Rama intercepted Beowulf and Fergus halfway. For the sake of his beloved woman, the hero Rama sneaked up on Beowulf and threw out a noble relic. He almost killed Beowulf and severely injured him. Fortunately, Cedo was escorted by Wu Ming's soldiers at the back. Otherwise, Rama's noble relic could have killed Cedo. However, if Cedo was beside Beowulf and Fergus, Rama would not be able to throw out his noble artifact. Afterward, when Fergus and Roma were fighting, Cedo was taken away by the crew of the Argo led by Aeson. They also killed Beowulf while they were at it. Atlanta was more than enough to deal with a heavily injured Beowulf, not to mention that there was also the god-magician Demetrius. Then, Rama, who was enraged once again, used his spiritual base and used another relic to injure Fergus. He then began to chase after Argo. Although it was called an injury, Fergus was almost done for. Rama had overdrawn his spiritual base to release the relic. Perhaps when Rama was fighting Wu Ming, he had also overdrawn his spiritual base to use the relic. As a lone servant, although Rama was summoned by the Holy Grail could only maintain Rama's current realm. It was impossible for it to provide unlimited mana. Almost all the other servants were the same. It seemed that only Wu Ming had a master, and that was Maeve. He couldn't see the command seal because Maeve was wearing a white silk glove that blocked the command seal. After that, Fergus needed to return to Washington, so he followed Rama on the way. When they passed through Rome's sphere of influence, Caesar and Cleopatra, who attracted attention, appeared. The two of them watched Rama chase after the Argo, and Fergus chased Rama. With the mentality of watching a good show and supporting Caligula, the two of them followed. As a result, the scene when Wu Ming saw the four servants gathered in the big pit appeared. However, unfortunately, Caligula had already been killed by Wu Ming, and the good show that they wanted to watch had turned into a bad one. If that's the case, Rama should be dying now. At present, they only knew that Rama had overdrawn his mana and spiritual base to release his noble artifact twice. Before that, they couldn't deny whether Rama had overdrawn his mana or not. Coupled with the constant running in this huge American continent, he had consumed a lot of mana. Not to mention, my noble artifact and Rama's noble artifact exploded. The explosion wasn't far from Rama, so he must have been affected. Wu Ming was only affected by the explosion, but the armor on his body was dimmed, and he still needed Maeve to use a command seal to restore it. Rama, who had no armor, overdrawn his mana, and unstable spiritual base, was even worse. Maybe he has already left. If that's the case, my plan to unify the continent will be one step closer. After all, if Wu Ming wanted to unify the American continent, Wu Ming, who had become enemies with Rama, would definitely be troubled by Rama, the great hero of India. Wu Ming's people had kidnapped Rama's wife. Now that Wu Ming had accepted the identity of the Celtic king, he had to shoulder this responsibility. Yeah, the hatred of stealing my wife is irreconcilable. I have to unify the continent as soon as possible, Wu Ming said in a serious tone. Wu Ming and Maeve had already planned it out. Wu Ming's goal was to restore the singularity, so he had to collect the Holy Grail of the singularity. There were a total of 4 Holy Grails, the Celtic king, the Greek king, the Roman king, and the Holy Grail king who was still unknown. Wu Ming, who was the Celtic king, could be said to have one less enemy. After all, Maeve, who had the Holy Grail, was one of his people. Therefore, he had to deal with the other forces. Of course, Lionhead's native force in the United States did not have the Holy Grail, so he did not have to categorize it as an enemy for the time being. Therefore, Wu Ming set a small goal for himself, which was to unify the United States, collect the Holy Grail, and complete the restoration of humanity. However, Lionhead can also work with him. After all, both of them have the same goal, Wu Ming analyzed. Lionhead's goal must be to restore the United States, and Wu Ming's goal was to collect the Holy Grail, so he needed to unify the country. In that case, the two sides could work together. But before the other 3 forces came to the singularity, we and Lionhead were mortal enemies. I'm afraid it's not that easy to bury the hatchet. Maeve said. That's right, mortal enemies would not easily unite just because of an additional enemy. It was not that easy. That's true, Wu Ming said in a deep voice. Then, Wu Ming thought of Gudatsi. I don't know if Tachika and the others came to this singularity. If they had the help of Chaldea's master, it would be a great help to collect the Holy Grail. After all, the reason why those followers were alone was because they were summoned by the Holy Grail. They helped Chaldea's master to take back the source of the singularity. After all, the singularity was caused by the followers with their own private wishes, so it was impossible to talk about it. By the way, in Celtic besides you, me, Fergus and Beowulf, are there any other followers? Wu Ming suddenly said to Maeve. Chapter 478. The reason why Wu Ming asked this question was because Wu Ming had never seen other Celtic servants. If he didn't meet Fergus, he wouldn't know that Fergus was on his side. There are 3 more, but one of them is not from Celtic, but from India, and he has a little relationship with Romo. Maeve pretended to be mysterious and said to Wu Ming with a playful smile. If there is a chance, introduce them to me. Wu Ming chuckled and said lightly. Wu Ming's meaning was obvious. He was going out again. Are you going out again? Really, can't you spend more time with me? Maeve said coquettishly. Her body began to produce charm again. Maeve naturally knew that charm was ineffective on Wu Ming, but it was her body's natural ability, and it was released involuntarily. Then, Wu Ming touched Maeve's head with his hand that was wearing white protective gear. Although I have become a king after all, I have no interest in it, so I will leave it to you, my queen. After touching Maeve's head, Wu Ming asked some information about his servants and Lionhead's information and left the room. My king, I will help you take care of our country. Maeve, who had once again turned into an infatuated woman, was left alone in the room. Wu Ming was ready to go to the United States, which was the westernmost part of the American continent. Now that he couldn't find Gudatsi for the time being, Wu Ming was ready to go to the countries that could be united. He just wanted to meet the old friend that he heard from Maeve. I just don't know if he remembers me, Wu Ming said casually. When he walked to the corner, Wu Ming met 2 people. Well, the person in front of Wu Ming was obviously a master and servant, and the 2 showed a very obvious superior and subordinate relationship. The former was a handsome man with long blonde hair, and the latter was a young man with short black hair and a mole. What a coincidence to meet the Holy King. The blonde man's tone was not too respectful, but also not arrogant, as if he was in front of a person who deserved a little respect. I am Finn McCool, this is my subordinate. The blonde man introduced to Wu Ming. Nice to meet you, Your Highness Holy King. I am Dilmund O'Dina. The black-haired man behind Finn said respectfully to Wu Ming. It seemed that Finn and Dilmund were two of the three remaining servants of the Celtic side. After all, Maeve had said that one of them was from India, but the two in front of Wuming were from Ireland. You don't have to be so courteous to me. If I remember correctly, you guys are from the Fjordanites. Speaking of which, you guys have some history with Fergus. Wuming nodded knowingly. Finn smiled calmly when he heard that. The necessary etiquette is still necessary. You are the Connaught Silver Dragon Cylinder who defeated Fergus. Even Cuchulainn didn't beat you. Naturally, you need to be respectful to a hero. Dilmund shook his head with a smile. Wuming had some recollection of what Dilmund said. When Connaught and Ulster went to war, Fergus ran over to serve Maeve. Because he couldn't stand Fergus's lecherous eyes, Wuming chased him away. At that time, Maeve even laughed at Wuming, saying something like, "Since you are jealous, then just accept me." Ahem. Wuming was just a siscon. How could he let his cabbage stay with a wild boar? Now that he thought about it, it seemed that Wuming was quite a siscon. He watched Artoria grow up, and Joan of Arc was younger than him in his memory. There were also Illyria, Mayu, and Shobi. They all seemed to be siscons or siscons. How could it be? It was just a coincidence. Wuming shook his head subconsciously, but this scene was humble in the eyes of Finn and Dilmund. You don't have to be humble. Your achievements on the battlefield between Greece and Rome are still vivid in our minds. At that time, Finn and Dilmund were not in Washington. The two of them were outside roping in stragglers. Of course, they basically did not gain anything. They only met a few low-level servants, and because they did not obey, they were all killed. Again, the American continent was very big. At that time, the two of them did not meet Fergus or Wuming. Then, near the battlefield, they saw the nuclear explosion caused by Wuming's noble phantasm. Wuming did not say anything more, and then asked the two of them, "You two, are you going to ask Maeve for instructions now? You don't have to do anything. Just defend our camp steadily." Immediately, Wuming gave instructions. The situation was not completely clear, and the third party of the Holy Grail force was not clear either. Doing nothing was the best way at the moment. Although Wuming said so, Finn was still a little hesitant. Maeve did give orders after Wuming arrived, and Wuming's words were the final word. However, no matter what, Wuming had only been here for less than 2 days. It was the same principle as the Empress Dowager and the Emperor. Just listen to Xiao Sai. At that moment, Maeve's voice came from behind Wuming. After all, Maeve was also a very active person, and it was unlikely that she would sit in the office for a long time. In addition, Wuming, Finn, and Dilmund had been arguing for a long time, so it was normal for Maeve to catch up. "Didn't I say that Xiao Sai's words are the highest order? You may leave," Maeve said casually to Finn and Dilmund. "Understood. Let's go, Dilmund." Finn nodded and waved at Dilmund. "Yes." Dilmund responded and followed Finn out of the place. At that moment, Wuming's heart was in turmoil. Sure enough, the servants are not obedient. Whether it was from Finn's attitude or the conversation with Wuming, it could be seen that he did not put himself in the position of a subject. He was just obeying Maeve's orders. Wuming believed that if it were not for the Holy Grail, Finn and Dilmund would probably have left here and set up their own house. After all, they were summoned by Maeve with the Holy Grail, and Maeve also had a slight suppressive power over them. "Is it okay?" Wuming asked Maeve with concern. Maeve naturally knew what Wuming was talking about. At least they are very obedient. After all, heroes are always eccentric guys. However, if Xiao Sai hates them, just get rid of them. Holding Wuming's hand, Maeve said charmingly, "That's not necessary. It's better than nothing." Wuming shook his head. Then Wuming felt that something was wrong. "Why do I feel like I've become a big boss?" "Sai. Listen to Xiao Sai." Chapter 479. Night. Missouri River Basin. A person wearing a black robe and a black hood, whose face couldn't be seen clearly, was quietly running along the Missouri River. The figure sometimes changed his route, sometimes he hid and sometimes he came to the Black Mountain in the western part of the Missouri River Basin. This silhouette arrived in a dense forest near Black Mountain, and stopped. The figure took off his hood, revealing a black-haired, golden-eyed face. The person who came was naturally Wu Ming, who was preparing to go to the western part of the Rocky Mountains to investigate and cooperate with Lion Head. It had to be said that there were many plains in the United States, but there weren't many forests, but they weren't few either. Wu Ming sometimes changed his route. Sometimes he hid and sometimes he didn't want to be discovered by the servants and humans in this area. At night, the people in the American continent were active, whether they were servants or humans. And this Missouri River Basin was a place that was not occupied by the Holy Grail forces. In this way, whether it was the followers, the native residents, or the rebels, they were like fish in water in this place. The unknown Holy Grail forces in the Rocky Mountains did not move, and Greece and Rome were fighting fiercely. Lion Head and Maeve were in the westernmost and easternmost part of the continent. In this way, no one had time to care about this place. Naturally, it became a place where many followers and a large number of human residents resisted. And this place, in Wu Ming's view, could be said to be the safest passage from the east to the west. Like a lone assassin, Wu Ming quietly came here. By the way, the meaning of being alone was not only superficial, but it also had another meaning. A lone follower actually referred to a follower that was not a force. After all, not all non-force followers were really alone like Wu Ming. On this continent, it was originally the native forces of the United States that fought against the United Kingdom and succeeded in independence, but now it was divided into 5 parts. In addition to the followers who held the Holy Grail and the forces summoned by the native forces of the United States, the Holy Grail also summoned extra followers. Due to the large number of Holy Grails with this singularity, there were many followers who were left behind. Apart from Finn and Dilmod killing a few unranked servants, Fergus also encountered many lone servants on his way to Alcatraz Island. Fergus, no, it should be the Celtic followers, were all warlike. Fergus had basically been fighting along the way. This was also one of the reasons why Fergus had been so easily beaten down by Rama. After all, Rama had also overdrawn his spirit base. With so many factors added together, Fergus had been unable to block him. On the other hand, Beowulf was completely unlucky. Not only did the despicable Rama launch a sneak attack on him, but he was also ambushed by the Greek team. Wu Ming did not even see him and left the stage immediately. Except for some servants with special abilities or noble phantoms, or a few servants that Fergus didn't kill, the rest of the servants were killed by Fergus. Even so, there were still a lot of lone followers who were active on this continent. At this moment, Wu Ming had become a lone assassin. It was reasonable to say that because of Maeve's wish and Wu Ming's cheating, the spirit base could not be changed. Moreover, because of the identity of the Holy Ruler, Wu Ming was like a big light bulb in the dark night, unable to hide the arrival of the Holy Ruler. But this can't stop Wu Ming from being a cheater. Although the authority and the Blade of Salvation were not brought into this body because of the Sairland spirit base, Wu Ming had brought his own dimensional noble phantasm, Dragonis Dragon's Nest. In the beginning, Wu Ming only wanted to use the dimensional Loon Rune to store things in a small space. Now, the Dragon's Nest could be said to have been reborn. Not only was it nourished by Wu Ming's magic every day, but it was also soaked in the origin of the moon for a long time. Then, it was soaked in Wu Ming's home, the origin of the moon for a long time. One had to know that this dimensional Loon Rune was engraved on Wu Ming's body. In other words, in the origin, Wu Ming's dimensional noble phantasm was equivalent to being strengthened all the time. Moreover, it was a qualitative strengthening. Now, the space inside the dragon's nest had become almost infinite. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a small world. Although it was still used by Wu Ming to store things, however, it was just as well. Wu Ming was a collecting maniac. Everything that caught his eye was kept in the dragon's nest. Putting aside the things that he collected in Kanzaki, Wu Ming had also been through several worlds and secretly stored a lot of things. If one had to say, Wu Ming's dragon's nest could be regarded as a different kind of gate of Babylon. For example, there were many items that could shield one's magic and aura. Since he was going to be an assassin, the first thing he needed to do was hide. Wu Ming took out a dimmed gem from his bosom. It was a tool used for assassination. It could shield one's aura, but it was no longer effective. This thing seems to be from the Yggdrasil, world tree. It's surprisingly useful. Forget it, who cares? Wu Ming casually crushed the dimmed gem. With a thought, the space fluctuated and golden ripples appeared. Then, Wu Ming took out a metal ball from the golden ripples. It was the metal ball that Xiaobi had fused with half of her core. I kind of miss that little girl. Wu Ming was naturally referring to his younger sister, Xiaobi. In Wu Ming's opinion, Xiaobi, who had just obtained human emotions, was like a child. Although her brain was more genius than a genius, Xiaobi was a parsing machine after all. Then, Wu Ming pressed the metal ball against his body without hesitation. In an instant, the metal ball seemed to have turned into liquid and integrated into Wu Ming's clothes. At that moment, Wu Ming had already taken off his armor and put on the clothes from the other world with the divine soul seed. This was the first time Wu Ming had taken off his armor in this singularity. He was inexplicably excited. Cough, cough. Is this the formation of an inner armor? Wu Ming could clearly feel that there was a layer of metal armor covering his assassin-style clothes. However, it was not completely covered. Wu Ming could feel it. Now that I think about it, the Kikai race is really a cheating race. In various senses. As he said that, a metal mask appeared on Wu Ming's face. Only the area where the eyes were was left with a rectangular gap with a rectangular black lens. Then, several particularly strange small magic circles unfolded around Wu Ming, setting off a small gust of wind. In an instant, the wind stopped, and the magic circles disappeared. That's it? Chapter 480. After all, the forest elves. No, it should be said that in their world, everyone's magic looked gaudy. Why did it not work in Wu Ming's hands? Forget it, as long as it works. Through the data on the black lens, Wu Ming could check his own status. Although the lens looked black from the outside, Wu Ming saw it as transparent. Not only that, the night was now like day in Wu Ming's eyes. At that moment, the lens display showed a map of Wu Ming's surroundings. On the map, places with energy were blue, and places without energy were white. After all, the Kikai elves did not use magic, so no matter what kind of unknown energy it was, as long as it was energy, it would be marked. Magic was blue. Looking at his white body, Wu Ming was a little confused. Others in this world shouldn't be able to see the forest elves' magic, right? That's right. Wu Ming used the Kikai elves' characteristics to cast the forest elves' magic that was copied into the metal ball. Gilliel had gotten Wu Ming many books about forest elves' magic. Wu Ming did not ask where they came from, and stored those magic in the core in the root. Because there was no need to learn it anymore, just like Wu Ming's nameless spellbook. Although Wu Ming used to flip through it often, he realized that it was faster to use the spellbook automatically than to cast it himself, so Wu Ming gave up. Back to the main topic. Although it was reasonable to say that the Kikai elves could only copy an attack that had been seen or damaged once, when he was in the root, Wu Ming had slightly modified the core, making the core sublimate from its original foundation. In short, it would not have any bad effects on Xiaobi. So, am I back to my old profession? Although Wu Ming was not strong when he was an assassin, Wu Ming quite liked it. After moving his body, Wu Ming felt incomparably comfortable. After all, it was still comfortable in the state where his aura was blocked. No matter how sneaky he was, it was as if he was in the open. At this moment, Wu Ming discovered that there were energy bodies approaching from the surroundings. Servant? He doesn't look like a passerby. With that thought in mind, Wu Ming activated the camouflage function and disappeared. Just as Wu Ming hid himself, a man with dark brown skin, half-naked upper body, and a small knife in his hand arrived. After vigilantly observing the surrounding situation and inspecting the place, the man quickly left. Servants that were attracted by the whirlwind just now? Wu Ming revealed himself and muttered to himself. Wu Ming could tell that the other party was a servant by the speed of a Class B when he left. What's more, the other party's body was also filled with a lot of magical power. Wu Ming could see clearly through the lens that the magic power in the other party's body was slightly dark blue. At the very least, the other party's magic attribute should be at Class B. It's rare that he is a caster. Wu Ming thought. It seems that I have to be careful. When he activated the core, Wu Ming caused a small whirlwind. A whirlwind appeared in the woods at night, which naturally attracted the other party's attention. As a caster, Wu Ming's assassin at the moment was not a good match. Assassins in the dark were most afraid of those fancy magicians. The other party should not have found me. After all, who knows what magic caster will use? If the other party's magic is quite powerful, then Wu Ming will be exposed. Later, Wu Ming looked at the place where the other party checked. Sure enough, there were some mysterious inscriptions that Wu Ming did not know. Is it a curse on this continent? Wu Ming pondered and activated the scanning device in the core of Ji Kai's seed. Immediately, the result appeared on the lens in front of Wu Ming's eyes. Sure enough, that guy turned out to be a caster, magician. Looking at him sneakily holding a knife, anyone who saw him would think that he was an assassin. If it weren't for the scanning information provided by the lens, Wu Ming wouldn't have seen that there was a lot of magical power in the other party's body. If the servants were close to each other, they could perceive each other, but they couldn't perceive how much magical power the other party had unless the other party continued to release magical power. Just like Wu Ming's skill Holy King's Glory, Wu Ming used magical power to release magical power. In the eyes of others, it was an incomparably huge source of magical power. Often, the existence of powerful magical power was not something to be trifled with. To put it simply, it was like tigers and lions roaring in nature to tell others that they were not to be trifled with. According to the scanning results, these inscriptions played a role in detection. As long as someone passed by this place, it would be triggered. Fortunately, although Wu Ming was present, the shielding magic of the forest elves had been working. I don't care. Destroying these inscriptions will arouse the other party's suspicion. After that, Wu Ming continued to move toward the west. On the way, Wu Ming also saved the map of the American continent in the core, and a virtual live map appeared in front of Wu Ming. Wu Ming looked at the map. There is a town called Riverton at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. After Riverton, we will reach the Rocky Mountains. Immediately afterward, Wu Ming put away the virtual map, pulled his collar, and continued to move forward. Almost a few minutes later, Wu Ming came to a place some distance away from Riverton. Looking at the sparsely lit small town in front of him, Wu Ming paused. He felt the presence of servants in the town in front of him, but the specific number was unknown. Immediately afterward, he activated the scanning function of the armor again. Sure enough, Wu Ming found a clue. Anti-detection and defense magic. Wu Ming found through the scan that there was a lot of magic around the town, and it looked like a Greek-style magic. After all, Wu Ming had a lot of dealings with Greek servants, so he could still see it. However, the anti-detection magic doesn't work on the scanning of the Kikai. Immediately afterward, Wu Ming activated the long-range scan to detect the number of servants on the opposite side. Although the Kikai was called a magical creature, they were more like high-tech machines. Wu Ming's scan was completely like an infrared scanner. Because the other party didn't set up a visual obstruction magic, Wu Ming's scan was easily successful. Just like Assassin, Jack the Ripper's information erased, it didn't work on the camera. So, long live science greater than over equal to. Later, through the scan, Wu Ming learned the number of servants in that town. Wu Ming, who knew the result, was really shocked if Ji Kai's scan was not wrong. There are more than 10 servants. Wu Ming was a little surprised. Through the lens, Wu Ming knew that there were more than 10 servants, which really shocked Wu Ming. What are these servants doing here? What's the big plan? Wu Ming's heart was filled with doubts. At that moment, an invisible arrow shot at Wu Ming. Chapter 481. Wu Ming heard the sound of air friction and leaned back, dodging the arrow that was shot at him. To be honest, if it wasn't for the warrior's insight, Wu Ming wouldn't have noticed the arrow. Looking at the ancient wooden arrow that was deeply embedded in the ground, Wu Ming found that it was entangled with magic such as silence, acceleration, and stealth, although these magic had been ineffective. No wonder he couldn't hear anything and couldn't see anything. It seemed that the opponent's magic was not low. At this moment, the lens in front of Wu Ming's eyes also showed the arrow attack. There was no doubt that the arrow that was just enchanted with many magic had escaped the scanning of the Kikai core. It seemed that he couldn't rely too much on things from another world. In any case, it was really inconvenient to use things that were not from his world. I've been discovered. By now, if Wu Ming still didn't know that he had been discovered, then he really lived in vain. Since he was discovered, Wu Ming simply didn't hide. Feeling that there was a servant running toward him, Wu Ming didn't escape, but stood up. The inner armor that was transformed by the Kikai core was still worn by Wu Ming. Then, magic emerged from Wu Ming's body, and the magic began to burn. The white flame covered Wu Ming's whole body. Then, Wu Ming raised one of his hands and waved. The white flame disappeared with the wave of his hand, and Wu Ming appeared in the air. He had already put on the white full-body armor. Arthur's gift armor. He muttered the name of the relic softly. The holy armor seemed to be responding to him as it flashed with white light. At that time, the attacking servant also arrived. It looked like... No, he was a berserker. Ah! Ah! Oppressor! You are the oppressor! Ah! The person who came was Spartacus, the Red Team berserker in the 14 Horsemen War. Because Wu Ming was in the Red Team at that time, so the two were regarded as allies. But Spartacus probably couldn't remember it. And the oppressor that Spartacus was talking about was probably Wu Ming's current identity as the king. This guy was quite obsessed with leaders, and he was even more obsessed with tyrants. But in general, he was still a berserker that could be communicated with. Of course, this was for the master. In this way, Spartacus, who had met Wu Ming once, jumped up, raised his ordinary iron sword, and slashed at Wu Ming. Clank! Wu Ming raised his arm and blocked Spartacus' iron sword. Arthur's armor of gift, which had a grade A defense against physical damage, was more than enough to block Spartacus's iron sword. Bang! Immediately after, with the sound of steel colliding, Wu Ming used his hand to block Spartacus's iron sword and pushed him away. Spartacus took a few steps back, stopped, and laughed excitedly. Ahahaha! Ahahaha! Oppressor! Give me even more pressure. Like a fanatic, Spartacus once again rushed to Wu Ming with his sword. To be honest, Wu Ming didn't want to fight with this guy. Spartacus's strength was grade A, and his durability was the highest grade, EX. In short, this guy couldn't be killed. However, in addition to that, Spartacus could also convert the damage he received into mana and store it in his own body to activate his healing beast's roar. In the Battle of 14 Nights, although Wu Ming was not present, through chatting with Joan of Arc, Wu Ming learned that she used her noble phantasm to resist Spartacus' noble phantasm. After all, it was a grade A noble phantasm, and it was supplemented by a large amount of magic. Although Wu Ming's armor could block a grade A physical attack, in the face of a grade A super explosion, he would be defeated if he was not careful. Because of this, Wu Ming didn't want to be entangled with Spartacus. It just so happened that Spartacus' ability, except for strength and durability, did not exceed grade C, and his agility was only grade D. In other words, there was no need for Wu Ming to clash head-on with his opponent. Of course, Wu Ming's strength had reached grade A, and he had the support of Lun's magic and mecha armor. He was not afraid of a head-on clash. Sure enough, it's better to fight quickly. After all, since Spartacus was here, it meant that the other 10 servants Wu Ming observed were also here. Although Wu Ming was not weak, after all, it was unlikely that more than 10 servants were first-class or even top-level servants. If that was the case, Wu Ming had to consider running away. Oppressor! Looking at Spartacus who rushed in front of him again, Wu Ming decided to end the battle immediately. Clank! The sound of steel colliding was heard again, but this time, Wu Ming did not block Spartacus' iron sword with his arm, but he firmly grasped Spartacus' iron sword with his palm. Ah! Oppressor! Spartacus struggled to pull back his weapon, but it did not move. At this moment, Wu Ming's hand that was holding Spartacus' iron sword was full of Lun's runes and electrical wiring. That was the Lun's magic that strengthened his strength and the mechanical armor's enhancement. The double enhancement allowed Silent Wonder's strength to temporarily surpass a rank. It was not correct to say that he was EX rank, but rather, his strength had become A++. After all, it was temporary. However, the data was nothing to worry about. Wu Ming's purpose was only to control Spartacus for a few seconds. Immediately afterward, Wu Ming's free hand was inserted straight into the space, and a golden ripple wrapped around Wu Ming's hand. Then, Wu Ming's hand was pulled out of the golden ripple, and a silver-white chain was pulled out by Wu Ming from the golden ripple. That's right, that was the pseudo-heaven lock that Wu Ming once created with Create Green item. Clatter! With the sound of the chain, Wu Ming threw the silver chain on Spartacus' body. Like a silver python, the silver chain tightly wrapped around Spartacus' limbs and body after coming into contact with him. Then, Wu Ming let go of Spartacus' iron sword. Clang! The iron sword fell to the ground. Although the pseudo-heaven lock also had a special attack on divinity, Spartacus did not have divinity, so the chain was just a solid chain that was difficult for Spartacus to break free. However, if one looked carefully, they would find that there were lune runes on the silver chain. Fearing that Spartacus would break free from the chain, Wuming instantly added lune runes to the pseudo-heaven lock after taking out the pseudo-heaven lock. As a result, Spartacus, who was bound by the strengthened pseudo-heaven lock, was strangled to death. Of course, Spartacus, who could not use his strength, naturally let go of the iron sword and let it fall to the ground. Immediately afterward, Wuming reached into the golden ripple and took out 2 chains. Of course, this time, it was not to deal with Spartacus, but to deal with the new servant. Create green item, advanced item creation. As Wuming's words fell, 2 holy swords were inserted into the ground. Chapter 482. Immediately afterward, Wuming wrapped the 2 pseudo-heavenly chains around his hands. After that, Wuming grabbed the 2 long swords on the ground. These 2 swords were almost exactly the same as Wuming's blade of salvation. To be precise, they were exactly the same as Artoria's Excalibur. These 2 swords were imitations created by Wuming using Create Green item. For the pseudo-Excalibur, although it could still release light cannons, its power and range were not only 1 level lower, but several levels lower. Of course, the sharpness of these 2 pseudo-holy swords was also greatly reduced. The reason why Wuming used Create Green item to create these 2 pseudo-holy swords was to use them as consumables. Through the scanning device on the mecha armor, coupled with the fact that the other party did not cover up, Wuming easily saw the servant coming from behind him. It's them. Wuming sighed. What an ill-fated relationship. He shook his head. With their speed, they could indeed get behind him, and by doing this, they must not let him escape. Wuming smiled helplessly. I didn't expect them to be summoned as well. They can be considered old rivals. The one who strikes first gains the advantage. I won't hold back then. Wuming smiled. With that said, Wuming wrapped the chains on his arms around the hilts of the 2 holy swords. Immediately, he threw the pseudo-holy swords. Excalibur! On the opposite side, the green-haired young man held a long spear and ran toward Wuming at a very fast speed. Although he was a rider, he had a permanent noble phantasm, so he did not need his own ride. Although this would expose his weakness, there were not many people who could catch up with his speed. You little thief who dares to spy on me, obediently accept your death. Then, listening to his disciple's bold words, his teacher, who had transformed into a centaur, chased after him. Don't underestimate the enemy, Achilles. The enemy is still in the same place. Achilles seemed a little impatient as he listened to Teacher Ma's earnest teachings and diligent exhortations. However, he still nodded to show that he understood. Yes, I know, Master Sharon. Although this disciple of his looked arrogant and unruly, he still gave him face as his teacher. Just as Achilles thought, there were almost no servants who could catch up with him. Even his teacher, Sharon, could not. Even if his teacher hadn't told him not to underestimate the enemy, Achilles would have slowed down. Otherwise, if Achilles were to run at full speed, even if he was in his centaur form and running on 4 legs, he would not be able to catch up with Achilles, let alone talk to him. At that moment, a voice came into their ears. Excalibur! What? Sharon secretly frowned. Thought in his heart, this was a little troublesome. Hearing this sentence, Sharon was shocked. Not to mention that it was a liberation noble phantasm, the holy sword Excalibur was quite famous. He tried to see the enemy's figure to determine whether the enemy was King Arthur or not, but even with his clairvoyance, the enemy was deep in the forest, so Sharon could not see the enemy's appearance. In addition, not only Sharon, but Achilles also knew about the legend of King Arthur and the holy sword. After all, King Arthur was too famous, especially in Europe. Although Sharon and Achilles both knew about the holy sword, the 2 of them had different reactions. Is the enemy King Arthur? Unlike Charon's frown, Achilles' first reaction after hearing the word liberation was excitement. For Achilles, who was asked to choose to die as an ordinary person or die on the battlefield, chose the latter. A powerful enemy was his motivation. However, even so, Achilles wasn't a hothead. Although he did not know why King Arthur would release his noble phantasm, he had seen the power of the holy sword before, from the Battle of the 14 Knights that he retained his memory of. Although he was also very puzzled as to why he retained his memory of that battle, since Sharon also retained it, he would leave the brainstorming to his teacher. Just as Achilles was about to take out his noble phantasm to surround the small world of the heavens, Achilles' cosmos, for defense, Achilles was stunned on the spot. It wasn't just Achilles. Even Sharon was stunned. This was because they saw two small light pillars less than 5 meters in diameter shooting towards them at a speed that was not considered fast. Of course, this was for the two of them who had grade A+ agility. If it were Spartacus, he would definitely be hit. Moreover, why were there two light pillars? Wasn't there only one holy sword Excalibur? What really confused Sharon and Achilles was not this, but the scale of the noble phantasm. Although they had never seen the holy sword Excalibur's noble phantasm, they had seen another holy sword's noble phantasm before. How could the scale be so different? In any case, Achilles and Sharon were completely confused right now. With such a scale, they did not even need to defend, they only needed to dodge. By the way, the two of them would not directly charge towards Wu Ming, but chose to attack from the side. Although the light pillars were less than 5 meters in diameter, if it affected Riverton who had a master, it would be quite troublesome. That was why the two of them went to the back. Of course, not letting this strange King Arthur escape was also one of the reasons. In just a flash, Achilles dodged the attack range of the two light pillars that were less than 10 meters in diameter side by side. For servants, especially those who had grade A+ agility, a distance of 100 meters only needed a breath of time, and a fierce jump was enough. Then, the two of them witnessed the small light pillars explode from their sides. Feeling the scorching heat, the two of them had no choice but to be serious. Even if it was a fake Excalibur, it was still a holy sword, and it was also a trump card noble phantasm. Of course, it was hard to say if it hit Sharon, but even if it hit Achilles, it would not take his life. At most, it would only injure him. At this moment, Charon's eyes flickered and he hurriedly called out to Achilles. Achilles, quickly retreat. Charon's clairvoyant skill combined with mind's eye, true, to achieve a short period of future vision. Through this, he saw chains appear in the light pillars that were less than 5 meters long. Although he relied on future vision and mind's eye to avoid being tied up by the chains, Sharon saw Achilles being tied up by the chains. Hearing his teacher's words, Achilles naturally prepared to retreat. But Wu Ming seemed to have heard Charon's words, and the chains instantly appeared from the light pillars and shot towards Sharon and Achilles. Walala! Chapter 483. Whoosh! Using his wooden bow to shoot an arrow, Sharon broke the chain that was heading straight for him, and quickly retreated on all fours. Then, Sharon looked in Achilles' direction. Without a doubt, Achilles was tied up. His spear fell to the ground, and his arms and body were tied up by the silver chain like firewood. In the end, Achilles had underestimated his opponent. However, this was also due to his competitive nature. Unlike Sharon, who had moved more than 10 meters, Achilles had only dodged to the side of the light pillar. It could be said that he had almost brushed against it to show off his ability. In the end, the chain covered by the light pillar had tied him up in an instant. This really was a case of, if you don't do it, you won't die. I see. The target wasn't me from the beginning. Sharon saw the light pillar disappear, and the chain slowly retracted. Perhaps it was not meant to tie him up in the first place. Realization dawned on him. Damn it, why can't I break free from the chain? Achilles said angrily. At this moment, Achilles was already using all his strength. He grimaced, but he could not break free from the silver chain. Instead, the chain was getting tighter and tighter. Sharon, on the other hand, did not care about his disciple. Instead, he raised his wooden bow and pointed in the direction of the forest. It wasn't just him. Even Achilles could feel that the owner of the chain was getting closer. So it seems that Spartacus has failed? Sharon said calmly. Of course, it was not Sharon who had asked Wu Ming to scout. Spartacus happened to be the closest to Wu Ming, so when he heard that there was an enemy, he ran over excitedly. Stop. Achilles. The chain is getting tighter the more you struggle, Sharon said to Achilles without turning his head. Achilles also realized that he could not break free no matter how hard he tried. He simply listened to Sharon and stopped struggling, and looked at the forest together. Seeing that the chain that did not bind Sharon was slowly being dragged into the forest, they guessed that the enemy was about to reach the edge of the forest. That's a chain that targets divinity. After all, An immortal demigod hero isn't easy to deal with. Wu Ming's voice came from the forest. This voice is... Karen frowned again. He had sensed something when he heard the word Excalibur. Furthermore, it was rumored that Sodric had obtained the inheritance of the Knight of the Round Table, Vilo Thyranst. It was not impossible for him to have a weakened version of the Holy Sword. Therefore, Ka Rong estimated that he was close to the mark. Of course, Achilles, who was in a state of rage, did not pay much attention to Wu Ming's words. His face was full of resentment. You despicable person, if you have the ability, let go of me and fight me head-on. What kind of hero are you if you play tricks? Then, wearing a holy white armor, a silver white chain wrapped around his right hand, and a silver white chain still wrapped around his left hand. However, this chain was connected to Achilles' body. As for the two holy swords, their durability had long since reached its limit. They turned into magic power and disappeared within the pillar of light. What? It's actually this guy. Sodric, if you have the ability, let go of me. Achilles became even more agitated as if he had seen an old enemy. I didn't expect you to be summoned here. Karen also had a face full of emotion. However, he still did not lower his bow and arrow aimed at Wu Ming. After all, this continent was too chaotic. Including them, there were a total of 6 forces. Who knew which side this old friend in front of him was on? In the face of their words, it was Wu Ming who was dumbfounded. What's going on? It was rare for them to have memories of the Battle of the 14 Horsemen, or were they the servants of the Battle of the 14 Horsemen? After all, Sodric had only appeared during the Battle of the 14 Horsemen. Wu Ming, who had a deal with the 2 great restraining forces, had already set a rule that his servant image could not be sent out without his permission. Since Karen and Achilles recognized him, then they either had memories of the Battle of the 14 Horsemen or were the servants of the Battle of the 14 Horsemen. But how did they recognize me when they didn't see my face? Could it be through my voice? Wu Ming began to think again. Karen had indeed recognized Wu Ming's voice, but Achilles had only reacted after seeing Wu Ming's armor. As if thinking of this, Wu Ming looked at his armor in relief and understood. This armor was basically the same as the armor Wu Ming wore during the Battle of the 14 Horsemen, but the armor worn by Wu Ming during the Battle of the 14 Horsemen was not as bright as this armor. There was also the addition of a helmet. However, with Wu Ming's voice, it wasn't impossible for Achilles and Sharon to recognize him. But since Karen and Achilles both had memories, why didn't Atlanta recognize him? Or did she recognize him but didn't want to say it? As for Spartacus, that guy doesn't care who you are, as long as you are an oppressor, I will beat you, regardless of whether you are an enemy or not. And while Wu Ming was thinking, Achilles looked at the silent Wu Ming and was a little impatient. Hey, say something. Karen was also thinking silently. Could it be that Sodric didn't have memories of the Battle of the 14 Horsemen like him and Achilles? Achilles' roar made Wu Ming come back to his senses. Sorry, I just didn't expect you to have memories of that time, so I fell into deep thought for a moment. Wu Ming's voice came from under the helmet again. Kaka. Then Wu Ming controlled the helmet to open. It's good that you still remember. Was the spying just now you, or was it your partner? Karen began to question Wu Ming. After all, if there was no hostility, spying secretly was not appropriate. However, even if they were enemies, Sodric's actions made Achilles and even Karen slightly disdainful. After all, in their eyes, Sodric was a person of importance. How could he be reduced to the point of peeping? But if you say you were peeping, then so be it. Your skills were so bad that you were discovered in an instant. Aren't you embarrassed? Wu Ming naturally didn't feel embarrassed, although what he did was a little shady. After all, passing by here had aroused Wu Ming's interest, so Wu Ming didn't know how to explain it. He couldn't say, I was just looking around because I was interested, or something like that. I passed by here and sensed the presence of many servants in this town, so I did a simple check. I didn't expect to be discovered by you. Wu Ming didn't even blush as he spoke about his peeping so openly. But he didn't expect that a simple scan of the mecha armor would be discovered by Karen. Just now, I sensed someone spying on us through the mind's eye, so I went ahead with Achilles and came out to take a look. Master will be here soon. If you want to run, do it now. Karen calmly said to Wu Ming. Hey, Sensei, how are you going to cover this guy? Achilles asked, puzzled. I'm not covering his escape. After all, Even if Chaldea's master and other servants come, if Sodric wants to run, I don't think our chances of catching him are high. Karen didn't care about Wu Ming's presence and said directly to Achilles. And there was something else Karen didn't say. Especially since you, the strongest of us, are still bound by the celestial lock. Sharon, who was highly intelligent, had guessed what Wu Ming was talking about when he heard about the chains of divinity. After all, the only silver-white noble phantasm that was tighter and tighter to the divine chain was the celestial lock. Although Karen was also very curious about where Wu Ming got the celestial lock. As he raised his eyebrows, Sharon continued to stare at Wu Ming. Then he realized that Wu Ming was smiling. Hey, the master of Chaldea you mentioned. Is it the orange-haired little girl called Fujimaru Tachika? Then, seeing Achilles' expression of, how did you know? Wu Ming got his answer. Looking at Gudatsi, who was escorted by a group of servants in the distance, Wu Ming loosened the chain that bound Achilles. Chapter 484. Gudatsi didn't know what to do at the moment. With the help of many servants, they finally passed through 3 singularities and retrieved 3 holy grails. Just when they were about to retrieve the holy grails after defeating all the enemies at the 4th singularity, the person behind the scenes who caused the burning of humanity actually came out in person. Because of Mr. Anderson, we managed to get a lot of information from him. But in the end, we didn't know what happened to the Magic King. He actually wanted to kill us directly. Pamela, Matthew, and even Mordred couldn't move in front of that guy. Is it going to end? Then, I was saved by Assassin, who I met in Winterwood City Singularity. I was really happy, and so was Matthew. As for Pamela, although she didn't show it, because of Assassin's arrival, she also relaxed. And it seems that Mordred and Assassin have an ill-fated relationship. I'm really curious. After that, although I didn't understand the conversation between Assassin and Magic King, in short, the two of them are enemies. Then, after some twists and turns, the Holy Grail of the Singularity was also recovered. Then, unexpectedly, Assassin also followed us back to Chaldea. Although I wanted to talk to Assassin, my body couldn't support it. In order to go to the next singularity, I had to sleep first. Anyway, Assassin also said that he would accompany me to the next singularity. As a result, when I woke up, the doctor said that because something happened, Assassin left. How can I be so unlucky? But fortunately, the doctor said that although Assassin couldn't go with us to the next singularity, he will go back, and there will always be a chance to meet. Then, because Assassin provided the coordinates of the next singularity, it didn't take long for me and Matthew to prepare to enter the next singularity. On the contrary, Pamela still didn't wake up, but it didn't matter, Matthew was already very strong. After entering the frame, when we were about to perform the ray shift, the doctor suddenly whispered a few words. Maybe in this singularity, he will come with a special identity. The cowardly doctor said something that made himself puzzled. Special identity? Could it be that the spirit base is no longer Assassin? I've been prepared for this for a long time. No matter how stupid I am, I can see that Assassin is not an ordinary servant. Can an ordinary servant compete with a crown magician and force her to leave? He was really looking forward to it. With that in mind, Matthew and I entered a new singularity, the American continent. Then, he was stunned by the scene in front of him. There were Roman soldiers with similar faces and Dragonfang soldiers, as well as Caligula and Hercules, who had been defeated before. Moreover, Hercules and Caligula seemed to still remember him as they roared and charged towards him. What was going on? Fortunately, a strong light suddenly appeared in another place, attracting the two great gods. Now he and Matthew could escape. As for where to escape to? Of course, to the other side of the light. The light seemed to be emitted by a powerful servant, plus Hercules and Caligula were attracted to it. If he wanted to live for 2 more years, of course, he would run in the opposite direction of the light. Although these Dragonfang soldiers and Roman soldiers were not weak, Matthew was also very strong. After a while we escaped. We happened to meet Mr. Geronimo, who was observing the enemy on the edge of the battlefield. Fortunately, Mr. Geronimo was a good person. After knowing his identity as the Master of Chaldea, he invited him to join. Anyway, after asking the doctor's opinion, Matthew and I joined the team to save the United States and expel those foreign enemies. Later, Mr. Geronimo took him and Ma Shu to their temporary gathering place, Riverton, where they had no master or servant. Wow, there were a lot of servants here. The American outlaw Mr. Billy Boy, the faceless king Mr. Robin Hood, and Miss Elizabeth. Although Miss Elizabeth was very happy to see me, when I thought of Elizabeth singing. Well, it seems that Mr. Sharon and Mr. Achilles are very strong. As for why they called him Mr. Sharon, cough. Because Mr. Sharon is Mr. Sharon. In addition to these, there was also Miss Nightingale, who was known as the Angel. It was said that she was treating a seriously injured and unconscious servant. I don't know why everyone was afraid of the treatment. In any case, including Matthew, there were now a total of 9 servants around him. He gathered so many companions at the beginning. This was a treatment that he didn't get in the previous singularity. Later, because Geronimo needed to continue to investigate the situation of other forces, he took Mr. Robin Hood and Mr. Billy Boy out. On the contrary, he was quite puzzled about the problem of other forces. Was there a lot of forces in this singularity? This was different from the previous singularities. Later, Mr. Sharon answered his and Matthew's doubts. According to the current intelligence, the continent was divided into 5 regions: Washington, Chicago, Alexandria, Salt Lake City, and San Francisco, with these 5 cities as the center, spread to the surrounding areas. At present, the United States was divided into such a situation. If they added the alliance of the lone servants, there were a total of 6 forces. After all, they could no longer be underestimated. The number of nearly 10 servants was not worse than the other forces. And their 6th force occupied the places that the other 5 forces did not occupy, including Riverton, where she was now, which was the base camp of the lone servants. Apart from that, each force had a powerful background. According to Master Karong, they had not caused any trouble these days. Instead, they had been collecting information. They had discovered that these 5 forces were made up of mythical or historical figures from various countries: Celtic, Greek, Roman, Japanese, and the native forces of the United States. And in addition to the native forces of the United States, the other 4 forces had the Holy Grail. Now that I think about it, the Magic King said that he had prepared a gift for Assassin. Could it be these? But I always felt that it was not for Assassin, but more like it was for me. Although it was hard to believe, but I have to accept the fact that I need to defeat these 4 forces. After learning from Mr. Sharon, the sky was dark and of course it was time to sleep. As a result, in the middle of the night, I was awakened by the unexpected arrival of the servants. Xiaofan, who sneaked down from the Rocky Mountains, and Spartacus, who rebelled against Rome. Looking at the 2 berserkers in front of me, I felt powerless for a moment. This was the same as the nurse. They were both problematic servants. However, as long as I found the berserkers' preference, it was easy to get along with them. I just had to compromise with them, and then they readily agreed. Spartacus' compromise was easy to deal with, but Xiaofan actually asked to be with her all the time, the kind of skin contact, which gave me a headache. But fortunately, Xiaofan also accepted the treaty that they could only hold hands during the day and not touch at night. Looking at Xiaofan's eyes, I always felt that she would lose her virginity like what Matthew told me. The next day, Ms. Pamilia woke up, and the doctor also sent her through the frame. This time, our 6th force can be regarded as strong, with more than a dozen servants. Later, under the discussion of Geronimo, Mr. Sharon, and the doctor, the current combat mission was set. Tomorrow, we will go to the westernmost force of the United States and ask for an alliance. After all, they don't have the Holy Grail, and the 2 sides don't need to be hostile, so we choose to ally first. Then, after familiarizing himself with everyone, night arrived. While preparing for tomorrow's itinerary, Mr. Sharon sensed that someone was investigating them. In this way, Spartacus, who had already discovered it, because he was the closest to the person who was investigating them, he ran over without permission. As expected of a berserker, Mr. Sharon and Achilles also went first. After all, the enemy was in the light, and Spartacus might be in danger. Later, I also pulled Matthew and others toward that position. In the distance, I saw Achilles was tied up in chains. This was really bad. After all, even the strongest among them, Achilles, was tied up by that shining silver enemy. But when I walked closer, it turned out to be Assassin. Assassin seemed to have seen me as well. She loosened the chains that bound Achilles and even waved at me. Really, it turned out to be a family member who beat up another family member. Hee hee. In any case, Assassin did not break her promise. Anyway, let's hug first. Chapter 485. Wu Ming loosened the chain that bound Achilles. When he saw Gudatzi, he knew that he couldn't fight, so he put the two chains directly into the golden ripple. Then, looking at Gudatzi, who ran all the way to him, Wu Ming quickly touched the armor and hugged her. Big and Zhan woo woo woo. Xiaofan, who originally wanted to stop Gudatzi, was instantly dragged to the back by Elizabeth, who was rolling her eyes. Okay, don't mess with them. Can't you see that Xiaolu is very happy? Why, Elizabeth said with a smile. Xiaofan stared at Wai Elizabeth angrily as if there was fire in her eyes. Looking at Wai Elizabeth's evil smile, how could she not know the female lizard's thoughts? It was nothing more than her. Woo 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 woo. You female lizard. Just you wait. Yes, yes. Assassin. You're here. Gudatzi hugged Wu Ming and shouted happily. As for Wu Ming, he dotingly patted her little head as if he was hugging his daughter. Aren't you afraid that you'll knock into something? My armor is very hard. With your small body, what if you break it by pouncing on me like this? But I believe that you won't let me get hurt, Assassin. It can only be said that Wu Ming's reliability made Gudatzi believe that she will not get hurt. Wu Ming could only smile helplessly. Okay, come down first. Matthew is still watching. Wu Ming patted Gudatzi's little head. Gudatzi also realized this and hurriedly got down from Wu Ming's body. He came to little Eggplant's side and smiled shyly. Matthew didn't care about anything, but he was quite puzzled. Senpai, you and Assassin Senpai have a good relationship, but you have only met a few times. Ha! Really? I feel okay. When Matthew said that, Gudatzi didn't care and said casually. Instead, Wu Ming fell into deep thought. Matthew was right. He and Gudatzi have been together for less than a week. How can the two of them feel like family? However, after all, it was not the time to talk. Wu Ming looked at the pitch-black surroundings and said immediately, "Let's get out of here first. This is not a place to talk." Other servants saw the relationship between Wu Ming and Gudatzi, and immediately put down their vigilance against Wu Ming. After all, they just wanted to peek. Even if they wanted to explain, this was not the place to talk. So they returned to Riverton's house. After returning to the house, only Sharon, Matthew, Gudatzi, and Wu Ming were left at the scene. After all, the sixth force had already been planned, and such things like discussing the plan were handed over to Sharon and Geronimo. But now that Geronimo was not there, then it was handed over to the great sage Sharon. After all, Karen's name was enough to convince everyone. Kyoheim was forcibly suppressed by Wai Elizabeth, Robin Hood, and Billy Boy. Because Kyoheim and Gudatzi signed a magic treaty provided by Da Vinci, so as long as Kyoheim wanted to touch Gudatzi at night, her power would be suppressed. But in fact, even if there was no power suppression, it was okay, because this berserker's strength was only E. However, Kyoheim's desperate resistance made even Wu Ming slightly surprised, but he didn't know why Kyoheim kept staring at him. Wu Ming was confused. Of course, this was what Gudatzi ordered Wai Elizabeth and the others to do. Gudatzi saw that Wu Ming was in a good mood, and obviously, she didn't want to spoil Kyoheim's mood. Pamelia saw that it was Wu Ming, and then she left with an uninterested look. Achilles, on the other hand, snorted and left. It seemed that Wu Ming's dirty trick of binding Achilles made him very unhappy. However, since it was related to his master, Achilles didn't say anything else. Then, Wu Ming explained his matter, and told them that he was now Celander. So that is to say, you are not Sodric now. Sharon deliberately emphasized the word, now. Sharon already knew that Wu Ming was definitely not an ordinary servant, at least not as simple as it seemed on the surface. Celander? I feel more familiar with the name Assassin, and I'm not familiar with history, so I don't know this name. Matthew, do you know it? Gudatzi was not familiar with mythology, so she wasn't familiar with the name Wu Ming said. The name Celander seems to be a character in the Long March. Matthew stayed in the sterile room all year round, so he read a lot of books, and he also knew some things about Celander but not all of it. Now let's let the genius explain. Suddenly, a rather cheerful female voice came. Then the communicator on Gudatzi's wrist emitted a light, and a virtual electronic screen appeared, but this time it was not Roman's figure, but a woman wearing a 15th or 16th century European trenchcoat, with a mechanical arm on her left arm, and a strange staff with a hexagonal crystal at the top. After seeing this face, Wu Ming was shocked. Isn't this Mona Lisa? Da Vinci's wife? Obviously, Gudatzi and Matthew were also shocked by the appearance of this Mona Lisa. Cough cough. Da Vinci's wife. On the other hand, Wu Ming was relieved when he heard the name Mona Lisa. Da Vinci was Mona Lisa, so it wasn't that hard to accept. Hee. After all, this was a world of magic, and science didn't work here at all. Da Vinci's wife, stop messing around. This time it was Roman's voice, and along with the shaking of the virtual screen, Da Vinci disappeared on the screen, and Roman's cowardly face appeared instead. Sure enough, when I see this face, I subconsciously hate it. Sharon frowned, and then forced himself not to look at Roman, and only listened to his voice. Even the great sage said that. Roman was disappointed, and put on an expression that said, I can't do it anymore. Wu Ming estimated that if it weren't for the fact that he couldn't move freely, Roman would have lost his balance. Doctor, please get to the point. Matthew coughed and said sternly. That's right, doctor. Since it's always the same evaluation, you should accept it. Gudatzi's words were like a sharp sword that pierced Roman's body. Fortunately, Roman wasn't as unreliable as he looked. Ahem, okay. Roman sorted out his thoughts and began to explain. According to the history books, Selander was an orphan picked up by Skahar. He was Skahar's younger brother, and also Skahar's first disciple. Not only did he inherit Skahar's martial arts, but he also learned all the Lune runes. If we were to really count, he should be stronger than Cuchulainn. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was the strongest warrior in Celtic. Assassin is that strong? The title of the strongest warrior in Celtic shocked Gudatzi. However, Roman's words made Wu Ming feel that something was wrong. Chapter 486. The reason why Wu Ming felt that something was wrong was because of the origin of Selander that Roman mentioned. As an abandoned orphan, he was adopted by Skahar. However, considering that the records in the future were not complete, and that Wu Ming and Skahar were considered siblings, Wu Ming did not intend to deny Roman's words. Then, in the face of Roman's words about being the strongest in the Celtic kingdom, Wu Ming smiled casually and said, The title of the strongest warrior in the Celtic kingdom. Maybe I really deserve it. It was important to note that Wu Ming was talking about himself, not Selander. After all, the Villo of the Knights of the Round Table was also Wu Ming. Because he had already planned it in his heart, Wu Ming did not intend to tell Gudatzi and the others. So, is this also the reason why Cuchulainn called you senior brother? Matthew suddenly realized. Gudatzi and Roman also recalled the time when Cuchulainn was a caster at the Winter Wood Singularity, and called him senior brother enthusiastically. Well, in short, that's it. Wu Ming smiled and shrugged. The more he spoke, the more mistakes he would make. It was better for him to keep quiet. But if you are Selander, then you are related to the easternmost Celtic kingdom. Suddenly, Sharon looked at Wu Ming with a serious expression, as if he was guarding against something. The easternmost Celtic kingdom? What does this have to do with assassin? Gudatzi was puzzled. By the way, although she knew that Wu Ming was now called Selander, Gudatzi still wanted to call Wu Ming assassin. Then, Roman spoke. Tachika, do you remember when Geronimo said that there were only two forces fighting? Although she didn't understand Roman's words, Gudatzi naturally remembered what Geronimo had said. Of course I remember. Mr. Geronimo chatted with me during our free time. He said that there were originally only the native forces of the United States and the Celtic forces on this continent. Not long after, the other three forces appeared. That's right. This represents the original history of the United States resistance against the United Kingdom. However, it has become a dispute between the United States heroic spirits and the Celtic heroic spirits, Roman explained. Matthew looked at Gudatzi and Roman on the screen with a puzzled look. Because it was what Geronimo said to Gudatzi when they were chatting, apart from Matthew and Roman who happened to hear it, even Matthew didn't know about it. After all, I thought that since we're already part of the five forces, I didn't tell everyone about this. Gudatzi awkwardly scratched the back of her head. At this moment, the great sage Sharon spoke up. Satyr is right about that. Then, I believe that Mr. Romani wants to talk about the leader of the Celts, Maeve, that we learned from Geronimo. All I can say is that he is indeed a sage, addressing Romani as Mr. Romani. When Ka Rong said this, it was Wu Ming who looked embarrassed. What about Maeve? Don't we already know that the leader of the Celtic forces is Maeve? It had to be said that Gudotsi really didn't know much about history and mythology. However, she couldn't be blamed. If it wasn't for some reason or interest, most students wouldn't know about Maeve. At this moment, our little eggplant blushed and quietly whispered into Gudotsi's ear. That, Senior, if the historical records are correct, Senior Celander is the person Maeve loves. Eh? Gudotsi looked at the blushing Matthew, then looked at the awkward Wu Ming. It seemed like this was true. Ahem. You're right, but it's not as simple as you think, Tachika. Wu Ming adjusted his expression and coughed twice. Celander is right. According to the historical records, Celander didn't accept Maeve's courtship. Roman spoke at the right time. Could it be a one-sided love? Instantly, Gudotsi's mind was filled with a tragic scene. Seeing Gudotsi fall into a reverie, Wu Ming gave her a karate chop. Although I don't know what nonsense you're thinking, it's definitely not what you think. Is that so? Ahem. Because Wu Ming didn't use much force, Gudotsi could only hold her head and smile awkwardly. Then, Roman began to tell the story of the long march to seize the bull. Celander finished his apprenticeship in the demonic realm and walked all the way to Connaught. He settled down there and by chance, he saved Maeve, who was the current lord of Connaught. In the end, Maeve stayed behind as a guard. Celander also stayed behind because he had nowhere else to go. Gudotsi and Matthew listened attentively. Sharon didn't interrupt. On the other hand, Wu Ming nodded. This was in line with his experience. Maeve could be said to be the Greek goddess of beauty, Aphrodite. She played with all the men she met. However, because Celander turned a blind eye to Maeve's beauty, Maeve's competitive spirit was aroused. In the end, because of her willfulness, she started a war with Ulster. The source of the war was the snatching of a sacred bull. After that, there was the story of Celander and Cuchulainn killing each other. In the end, the war ended because Maeve's father, the King of Ireland, interrupted. Celander took the opportunity to leave and Cuchulainn was killed by Maeve's plot. Maeve was also assassinated because she was immersed in her love for Celander because of Celander's departure. That was the end of the story. Roman briefly described the long march to snatch the bull. It was almost the same as Wu Ming's experience. Wu Ming really didn't know what happened after that. With his own long march to snatch the bull, the ending was probably different from the original story. Therefore, Wu Ming didn't say anything. Actually, the rumors about Maeve and Celander are a little messy. There are a few versions, but this version is generally recognized as the most historically accurate, Roman continued. Wu Ming nodded in his heart. It was indeed quite accurate. It can be said that the long march to snatch the bull was caused by Celander. If it wasn't for Celander, I'm afraid there wouldn't be a long march to snatch the bull. However, Wu Ming smiled bitterly. You're wrong about that. If it wasn't for me, Maeve would have caused this war because of her selfishness. And Maeve also met two men who weren't swayed by her beauty. One loved her the most, and the other was the most ruthless. Wu Ming could understand. The one who loved him the most was naturally himself, and the one who was the most ruthless was probably Cuchulainn. Cuchulainn had delayed Maeve a lot of things. Although Maeve's original intention was to use the war to delay Wu Ming, the meticulous Maeve must have planned how to make Wu Ming stay after the victory. In the end, she was delayed by Cuchulainn, and Wu Ming took the opportunity to escape. Speaking of which, I still have to thank junior apprentice brother, Wu Ming thought. So that's how it is. What Master Karen is trying to say is that Assassin's appearance should be related to Maeve, right? Suddenly, Gudotsi clenched his fist and punched the palm of his other hand. When did Gudotsi become so smart? Wu Ming looked at Gudotsi in confusion. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.